Chapter 11. Nothing more we can do at this stage, Chief, is there? Harry Warden came in, carrying 2 plastic cups of coffee. He handed one to Gwendraeth. You're not getting off that easy, Warden. Don't get me wrong, Chief. I like murder. I do, Harry Warden replied. It beats routine traffic stops and tracing tree huggers any day. But what I mean is, it's not a lot to go on, is there? When was the last time you traced a tree hugger? Gwendraeth blew across the surface of his coffee. There was that one last week, there was. What was her name? Anne Armitage? The one with the tight boots and jeans and what a brother who wanted to be an eco-terrorist. Try and concentrate, Gwendraeth warned. Who would want to force Parker Merriam off the track into the gully, and why? He's a complicated man, Chief. He's educated. Was, Warden. Was. And what has his education got to do with it? Best income predictor, isn't it? Aside from inheritance. You've been reading The Economist again, Gwendraeth countered. His coffee was now just cool enough to drink. No harm in that, is there? No harm in self-improvement. Thought you should encourage it, being my superior. I don't want theories of economic advancement, Warden. Why don't you just concentrate on getting promotion? I need breadth. You told me that before. Never mind about breadth for now, will you? Just think, you're Parker Merriam. You borrowed a car. You're going into town early. You like to get your shopping done before the crowds. You're driving along a track that you've driven at least 100 times before. Then you see something. What, Chief? Something that disturbs your concentration. A shock, like. Obviously, but what kind of shock? There was a silence while Harry Warden thought. He puckered his lips together and looked down at the floor. His coffee lay neglected on a nearby desk. After a while, he spoke again. Must be something to do with the family, mustn't it? It's what you've always told me. Don't look too far for motive, you said. It's not a puzzle. It's nearly always in the family. Brilliant, Warden. Are you being sarcastic, Chief? Never mind that now. Get your coat. Where are we going? I think it's time we talk to Parker Merriam's daughter. Don't you? The kitchen of Plas Wern Las was a large, high-ceilinged room that had obviously been built onto the main structure sometime in the last century. Exposed roof timbers were bolted together at the apex, and from the connecting crosspieces were hung strings of onions and bunches of herbs. Underneath these, a large scrub pine table served as a work island. When Gwendraeth James entered the large, bright room, followed by Harry Warden, a tall woman with a tattooed face and a half-shaven head was cutting vegetables with swift, chopping movements, then emptying the cutting board into a large pan and starting again. A mixed pile of uncut vegetables lay to one side. You're not Samantha Merriam. Too right I'm not, Queenie Rogers countered. And you're no Daniel Craig either. I try my best, Gwendraeth James replied, casting a quick sideways glance at Harry Warden to see if he was smiling. He was. Can't be blamed for that, I suppose. But if it's not your fault you're a copper, it must be somebody's. So, she's not here. There's a stile. Queenie Roberts pointed with her knife in the direction of the back door. Over the stile there's a path. Down the path a bit there's a fallen tree. By the tree there's 2 people with a saw and axes. One of these is Samantha Merriam, the woman. Obviously. Can't be too obvious, can I? Wouldn't want you to suffer from brain strain or nothing. Gwendraeth James didn't say anything more. He turned in the direction she'd indicated and began to move. Harry Warden followed. A short distance away from the house, they saw the stile that Queenie Roberts had mentioned. Harry Warden clambered over first, to be followed in more leisurely fashion by Gwendraeth. Sure enough, a winding path skirted the edge of a wood, a pine plantation fringed with more native deciduous trees. They followed the path a short distance, and then they saw two people working on a large ash tree that had fallen across the path. A man in a flat hat and battered wax jacket was wielding a chainsaw. A dark-haired woman in a plaid sweater and jeans was moving branches to one side. "Samantha Merriam," Gwendraeth James called over the noise of the chainsaw. The woman looked up. She was wearing a floppy woolen hat in a contrasting pattern to her sweater, Gwendraeth noticed. Frizzy black hair poked out to the sides of her hat and framed a pale face with a sharp nose. "Who's asking?" "Gwendraeth James, Maisavant CID." Gwendraeth pulled out his wallet to show his ID. "And the other one?" "Harry Warden, Detective Sergeant Harry Warden." Gwendraeth turned towards his assistant, who was already replacing his own wallet in his pocket. "I think we'd be better off over there," Samantha Merriam said, pointing to a clearing near a large oak. "David hates to stop working once he's started." Gwendraeth James and Harry Warden watched as she communicated her intention through gestures to the man with the chainsaw. He nodded back to her and carried on working. A large branch fell to the ground. The smell of sawdust mixed with the smell of petrol. They had no choice but to follow Samantha Merriam to the raised piece of open ground some 30 feet away. "It's about my father." She was now sitting on a gnarled root as Gwendraeth and Harry Warden approached. As they turned to sit next to her, they could see the countryside unfold beneath them. Beyond a green painted iron fence, there was a patchwork of small fields. Hedge lines ran down to the river. "Very nice," Harry Warden said, reaching the sitting woman before Gwendraeth. "You don't forget that, even when you live here," Samantha Merriam replied. "I feel very lucky." "Your father," Gwendraeth began, but she interrupted him. "You're wondering why I'm not more distraught? Why I'm not inside nursing a handkerchief?" "Not exactly, but, well, I was, Inspector. Let me tell you, I cried my eyes out for a day and a half, and then I stopped. I couldn't cry for him any more." "You were close?" "I think you must know we weren't," Samantha Merriam said. "Otherwise, you wouldn't have asked that question. Anyone could have told you we weren't nearly as close as we could have been." "And that was because—" "What are you looking for, Inspector?" She was watching Gwendraeth closely. "The truth." "Well, then I could say it was because of our personalities, I suppose. But that would only be partially true." "I don't understand." Samantha Merriam brushed her hair away from her face, and she looked straight at him. "I didn't really expect you would. You're a policeman, after all." "Meaning?" "Meaning, we don't expect you to be particularly understanding. Not where relationships are concerned." "You could try me." "I could." "We're not ogres, you know, miss," Harry Warden interjected. "We have families, too." "You do," Gwendraeth James said. It was a warning not to go too far. "I think you already know my father was not a particularly nice man," Samantha Merriam said. She took her hat off and ran her hand through her tangled black hair, which she then freed with a shake of her head. "We had our difficulties." "Which were?" "He left when I was 7, you know. My parents were divorced soon after. I only saw him at weekends or holidays after that. We did things together. It worked better that way."
"What kind of things?"
"We were living in London then. My mother's still there, in the same place. One weekend, I remember, he took me to Brent Reservoir. He taught me to fish, things like that."
"Sounds pretty good to me."
Harry Warden couldn't help himself. "It was, if you didn't want to talk."
"And you did?"
Gwendraeth said. I suppose I wanted warmth, Inspector. I wanted to feel close to him. I don't think I was that unusual.
You're the only child?
No. I have a brother, Simon. He's younger than me. Doesn't remember anything about us being together. I mean, as a family.
And you do?
Gwendraeth James's question hung in the air as a hawk appeared over the tops of the trees. It seemed suspended for a moment and then caught a thermal current, pitching itself before swooping suddenly down into the valley below. Sorry, Inspector? You were saying?
Do you remember much about being together as a family?
Has this got anything to do with my father's death?
It might,
Gwendraeth James answered. He looked for more signs of the hawk. Couldn't see any. My father, Samantha Merriam continued, was a distant, meticulous man. He was a biologist, but he could have equally well been anything that demanded a cool intelligence and attention to detail. He might, for instance, have made a very good code breaker or a computer engineer. He could never have been a psychiatrist. Self-examination didn't interest him remotely.
You didn't like him?
I loved him. I never gave up on him despite his remoteness. I moved to Wales to be nearer to him. I was very sorry when it didn't work out. What happened? It's Harry Warden's turn. This time, Gwendraeth didn't object. We had an argument soon after I moved here. I came for a visit to see how it might be. Marion's an old friend of my mother's, so I had somewhere to say. My father was already installed in Tretheig Rectory. He had a couple of hives on the hills behind. He went out every morning to check them, carried his notebook. He made drawings of any plant that took his fancy. He was happy. I didn't realize that. I made a mistake. I suggested that we rent a cottage and move in together.
Harmless enough, wasn't it?
Gwendraeth James watched to see if Harry Warden wanted to say anything. You might think so. My father didn't. He went into a rage and told me that I had no right to try and follow him to Wales and interfere with his privacy. He told me I had no idea how to live and that I was the last person he would ever want to share a cottage with. It was all pretty hurtful, as you can imagine.
So you didn't see him much after that?
Gwendraeth resumed the questioning. We lived less than 20 miles away from each other, but I didn't see him for almost a year.
So you've no idea why anyone would want to kill him?
Just then, the chainsaw, which had been reduced to a steady rhythmic clattering in the background, faltered and then stopped completely. You've no evidence of that, surely? Gwendraeth James saw the man in the wax jacket adjust the choke control and start the saw again.
I'm sorry, he said. I am not satisfied it was an accident.
May I ask, why not?
As you said, your father was a careful man, meticulous to a fault. He's unlikely to have done anything foolish.
You think, Samantha Merriam said, that there's always time. Some way you don't give up, despite the difficulties. And then, through circumstances that have nothing to do with you, you miss the opportunity. Or it passes before you realize it's gone.
I'm sorry,
Gwendraeth James replied. There was something indefinably fragile about the woman in front of him, something that moved him in spite of himself. So you see, Harry, Warden added, if anything occurs to you, anything at all, please let us know. I will. Suddenly she was gone. She rejoined the man in the wax jacket, just as the chainsaw resumed its high-pitched chattering and the wind picked up and sawdust began to blow towards them. Beautiful,
isn't it? Harry Warden indicated the view in front of them. A different hawk banked high, waiting for an opportunity.
If you say so,
Gwendraeth James answered. His mind was elsewhere.
I won't accept any more delay. Are you listening to me, Gwendraeth?
It was later the same Friday afternoon. Gwendraeth James sat in Chief Superintendent's office, where he had been summoned after his return from Plas Wern Las and his interview with Parker Merriam's daughter. It was now quiet in the room, which was carefully furnished with a regulation carpet and 2 dark brown leather armchairs, which had obviously come from somewhere else. Immediately behind the Chief Superintendent's desk was a framed photograph of himself with his 2 daughters. His wife had died some time previously, and underneath that was a dark oak bookcase filled with military history books, mostly about the Peninsular War, on which Harding was reputed to be something of an expert.
Well, he interviewed the girl. I'm not entirely convinced she's telling the truth. About her father?
Gwendraeth nodded in reply. There was something about his relationship with Harding that told him it was prudent to be as close-mouthed as possible. It was not that Harding disliked words. It was rather that he tended to pin them down to an absolute meaning that sometimes made Gwendraeth uncomfortable.
Do you have any evidence?
The question hung in the air between them.
Both of them knew the answer.
It was a situation they'd been in more than once over the last few years, since Harding had transferred from his old position near Shrewsbury after his wife had died.
I take it that the body is released then? Inquest will be on Monday,
Gwendraeth said.
We talked to the coroner.
I would like to keep this as simple as possible, Chief Superintendent Harding replied.
For obvious reasons. I don't understand, sir. I think you do, Gwendraeth, Harding added. I've never found you to be obtuse about political pressure. Are we talking about Michael Portman then, sir?
Gwendraeth was not afraid of a direct question. Chief Superintendent Harding fiddled with his fountain pen, which he lined up neatly with the leather binding on his blotter.
He is
very well connected, he said.
May I ask to whom, sir? No, you may not.
And don't let me down.
I see.
Make sure you do, Gwendraeth. No one wants to see this matter become overcomplicated.
I think you'll find it'll be an open verdict, sir. Don't see what else is possible. Don't let the whole thing become impossible. That's all.
When he'd finished speaking, the Chief Superintendent glanced at his watch to indicate that the interview was at an end.
I'm counting on you, he said,
as Gwendraeth James got up and left the room.